Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. Have had the gift of recovery since December of 1972. Purpose of these podcasts is to try to take a deeper dive into the 12 steps, as well as exploring the psychology, the history, the spirituality that underlie and help people understand at a deeper level what real recovery from addiction is about. And I want to thank all of you folks who have donated to keep this thing going. It's really a great help in that regard. Couldn't do it without you. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, please visit our two-way prayer website, learn more about the form of prayer that they did in the early days of AA. It's, I think you'll find it exciting spiritual renewal material, okay? And this is the third in our series on interventions. My guest is Debra Jay. Jeff is the author of a book titled Love First, A Family's Guide to Intervention. And I put a link to the book in the show notes. And you'll also find there a website that Jeff maintains. It's got lots of really good information on addiction, the intervention process, and on the deeper subject of family recovery. So if you happen to have one of those families, you might want to check it out and see what you're doing right and what you could do a little bit better. Jeff and his wife, Debra, are strong believers that addiction recovery really needs to involve the whole family. You know, we say it's a family illness, but it's also strengthened by family recovery. And Jeff is in long-term recovery himself and recognized as a leader in the field of intervention training. So welcome back to the podcast, Jeff.
Thank you, Father Bill. It's so great to be with you.
Have you been having fun?
Well, I've been having a lot. It's always fun, I guess you could say, overcoming the challenges of, helping families through this process. It can be very challenging. It can be difficult, but it's very rewarding too.
When it works, and most of them do work, it is rewarding. But it is difficult. And a lot of material goes into it. But what it seems to be saying to me is preparation is everything. And if you do the preparation properly, the intervention itself is going to go fairly smoothly.
That's correct. Preparation is the key. It's not only just choosing the team members and the how, when, and where of it, but it is preparing for objections. What is the person likely to say? How are we going to deal with that? In the rare exception that we have a walkout, how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to pick the treatment center? And there are a lot of details that need to be attended to.
Yeah, and fortunately, you have a checklist in the back of your book. You're almost as OCD as I am. I like that about you. We leave nothing to chance.
Yes, I want to give credit to my brilliant and beautiful wife, Debra, because she should get the credit for most of that, because I am more of an improviser, and she is more detail-oriented. Not that I'm not. I don't want to go too far with that, but Debra really gets the credit for that kind of thing.
So we're going to pick up with chapter 21. And in that chapter, you give some helpful advice for building a recovery team, not an intervention team. These are the people who are going to participate in the intervention, but they're also going to support the alcoholic and the addict in their recovery process. And you encourage people to begin by creating a preliminary list of who might be the people to call and to invite to this process. What's going on at this stage in a person's mind? What's helpful?
We want to look for the most important people in the alcoholic's life, family members and friends. And we want to see who's out there who may be influential with them. They don't even necessarily need to know everything about what's going on in the process. For example, someone could have an aunt who meant a great deal in their life, but they live, far away and they don't really know what's going on now. But if that person comes to the intervention or is involved in the intervention, they may be tremendously influential and help the person come to a yes.
So you encourage people to be free thinking, to create a long list, and then you're going to narrow it down, perhaps.
That's right. Yeah. So we want to think about who are all the potentials, and then let's narrow it down to somewhere between maybe 4 and 10. Maybe we're going to have a very top number of 12. Sometimes we want to keep it a little smaller. That's something that you kind of work through with your interventionist.
Now, you caution people in 3 categories, I believe it is. So let's run through these. These are people who might not be so helpful. Not necessarily completely excluded, but caution lights are going on. One is a person who's addicted themselves.
Yes. Now, if a person is, way off the deep end with their addiction, they may be a good friend of our subject, but they can't be involved. On the other hand, I have had times when we have the drinking buddies there.
Yeah, me too.
If they can clearly demarcate the difference between their drinking and the person that we're intervening on, for example, they still have their job, their marriage, and everything else, whereas the person we're intervening on, they're suffering a lot of consequences, then those drinking buddies may be very powerful, because I'll tell you, when your drinking buddies tell you it's time to go to treatment, that just might be the end of the road.
Yeah, I got intervened on at 16 by a friend. It didn't take, but here's what he said, Jeff. He said, Bill, he pulled me aside one night. He said, Bill, there are people who shouldn't drink. And then there are people who shouldn't even think about drinking. And then there's you. Now, this was my drinking buddy.
Wow.
Never forgotten it. Never forgotten it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Second, you warn about somebody who would likely warn the alcoholic or the addict that an intervention is about to take place.
That's right. We need some confidentiality when we're planning this thing. Now, it's not fatal if the person finds out. I've had that happen plenty of times, but it does make things more difficult. So we want to pick team members who are able to plan in a confidential manner.
Yeah. And then the third and last is consider removing anyone who's strongly disliked by the alcoholic or addict.
Yes, we don't want to have that kind of, conflict defocus us from what we're doing. On the other hand, if the reason that they are strongly disliked at the moment is that they're a truth teller and they've been a little bit maybe confrontational, and then they experience the person being very loving and very, appropriate during the intervention, that might be okay. So again, it's just something to think through. But you don't want to get into some sideshow because of personality problems.
You have an important chapter, and it raises some serious issues about the pros and cons of involving the workplace, the employer. Can you talk about that?
When the individual is employed by a small company, they typically know about the problem. They typically value the employee, but realize that they need some help. And so I always want to question the family about that. Does anyone know the owner? Does anyone know, the supervisor and so forth? And then we can decide, shall we involve them? Should we at least get a letter from them? Often we can get a letter from the boss saying, take the time you need. You've got insurance. You qualify for FMLA. Go do what you want to do. Well, that takes away a huge objection that a lot of people have. I can't take the time off work. So that's fantastic. If it's a very big corporation that they're involved in, that's probably not going to be the case. And so what we want to do at a minimum is have a family member call the HR department anonymously and just say, we're planning an intervention for one of your valued employees. We want to know what the steps are and they'll be very helpful. They'll tell you, there's an employee portal. They can do this. They qualify for Family Medical Leave Act. They have, this is the person that they're going to need to call. And once again, that helps us in our preparations to answer important objections about I can't take time from work and so forth. So it's something that, we go on a case-by-case basis, because there are some times that, you should not involve the employer in any way. So there's a lot to think about.
A lot to think about, and you present a very balanced picture, I thought, in that chapter. There are pros, there are cons. So careful consideration is advised.
Right. I'm planning one right now where we may want to get the person to a yes and then let them decide how they are going to deal with their employer, because they are a very highly placed executive, and they'll be able to navigate it just fine if they decide this is something that they want to do. And they will appreciate the fact that we did not include the employer, did not say anything to anyone, and we're kind of giving them control over that part of their life. That's a way of preserving their dignity too, and giving them some agency around that.
I want to talk in very general terms about what it is that's happening in this whole process. You have chapters on leverage and the influence of the group. And that's always been fascinating to me. It's like they start off with "this will never work," and as the team develops, you can feel the power shifting. So talk about leverage and power.
Boy, that's so true. And a lot of families wrongly think that they can't do an intervention because they don't have enough leverage. They can't force them into treatment. Leverage is something like, maybe the person is married and the spouse has come to the end of their rope, and they're either going to go or it's going to be divorce court. Well, there's some leverage there. Or maybe it's an employment thing or a legal thing where you have some real leverage to kind of compel the person to go to treatment. But what we find in practice is what's even more important than leverage is influence, is the hard stuff. I remember one intervention that I did. I'll never forget it. It was an ex-military man, and he worked for a small military contracting firm. And we had, his spouse there and his sister and his 80-year-old mother and his boss, who was a former military guy too. And I'll tell you, this guy was dug in, and he wasn't going to go. And the boss said, you've got to go, or, you're not going to be able to work for us anymore. And he said, you can take the job and shove it, and his wife said, I can't live this way anymore. And he's like, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And then there was his little 80-year-old mother, and she just started to cry.
Yeah. And
then he started to cry. He started to cry. He could not betray the slightest emotion. He started to cry. And she said, I just want my son back. And he said, I'll go.
Yeah.
And it was all over.
Yeah.
So never underestimate the power of influence, the real heart stuff that makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and goes to the theme of your book. That's love first. It's not power first.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nice. Chapter 30 deals with choosing a date and a time to do the intervention itself. What are some of the factors to consider there?
Well, sometimes you have immovable objects, I like to call them. Like, for example, there's a family wedding coming up in 2 months. So do you want to do the intervention before the wedding? Do you want to do it after the wedding? Because this person is going to be going to the wedding. Or do we have to do it before and then arrange for them to have some time away from treatment so that they can attend the wedding and then go back? So there may be something like that we have to think about.
You don't recommend doing it during the wedding, hey?
Right.
Not a good idea.
I've never tried it as the toast speech. Telling the groom.
We're taking your drink away, Charlie.
Yeah.
You're going non-alcoholic here. Next chapter is choosing a place. Geography is really important, isn't it?
There are a lot of factors there.
Yeah.
So ideally, we like to have the person, not in their own home, but they're coming somewhere else. And why
not in their own home?
Well, because for some people, not all, we may decide that they would be they may be unwilling to meet with people. And so if we can get them somewhere else, then
they're off guard too.
That's right. Although sometimes that's the only place we can do it. And
Yes.
having done interventions for many, many years now, I always just say we just have to go with what we've got. Ideally, we'd love to get them to a second location, and that would be great. But let's say we're intervening on somebody who is in college or something like that. Well, we don't really want to do it in the dorm room. We'd like it if they're coming home for the weekend and they're back to the family home, and that would be a good time to do it. There are so many variations on things, but it's just another factor. We go through all the possible factors in preparing for an intervention and what's going to be optimal, not what's easiest, but what is going to be optimal, what's going to give us the best chance to really come forward with a lot of love and help the person get to a yes.
And that getting to a yes is really the goal of the intervention. It's to take them from this step to the next step.
That's right. It's to help them get to a place where they will say, okay, I'm going to step away from my life and deal with this life-threatening medical issue that I have. Because most people will just keep going and going and going and going and going until they have some catastrophic consequence.
And I think it's important to maybe put a pause here, because what you are describing, defining, is what I would call a classical intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, if people learn the different components, they may be able to structure an intervention that is not classical, but it's gonna fall in line because they're following the same things. I did a family intervention that you're aware of the situation. I won't go into the details here, but the individual, I was going to escort him to treatment. His response was, well, I'm going, but I don't have any choice.
Yeah.
The situation had unfolded in such a way that he knew he needed to do this thing, but it was not a formal intervention. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are many, many variations, but no matter what the variation, there are a few things we're always trying to do. We want to preserve the person's dignity. We want to bring love forward. We want it to be all about support, and we want it to be more about just going to treatment. That's fantastic that you're going to treatment, but what we want them to really feel and know in their hearts is that they have a family and friends recovery team that is behind them, that is going to walk with them, that is going to start going to Al-Anon, do structured family recovery, whatever it is that they're going to do, so that they're not alone. We're all kind of getting in the canoe with them, and we're going to start paddling away here so that they're not just an isolated I going to treatment. I mean, that may be in fact true. We're not all going to be admitted to the treatment center, but we want them to know that they're part of a greater we that is going to be with them all the way.
A lot of interventions I've done, the family wishes they could be checked into treatment, you know?
That's
they
right.
They need it as much as the other person. Selecting the chairperson. I'm assuming this is when you don't have an interventionist, or there is a twist where even in the case where you do have an interventionist, somebody is selected to be in charge.
Yes, the chairperson should be someone who is, I mean, let's take the time when you don't have a professional interventionist. Right. The chairperson should be someone who is very well respected by the addicted person and has the least amount of baggage. Right. So often that's going to be an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, often of the opposite sex of the person that we're intervening on.
It's not going to be the spouse.
It is not going to be the spouse. It might be a very good friend or colleague.
Yeah.
But most often it's a senior family member of the opposite sex of the person that we're intervening on. Now, if we're intervening on an older person, maybe we're intervening on someone who's 75 and they have a 30-year-old granddaughter. who is an attorney.
Yeah.
She might be a great chairperson. There are different ways to go with the chairperson, but they need to be well respected by the individual we're intervening on, and they should not have a lot of baggage with them.
And their role is what?
Their role is to introduce the process, to facilitate the reading of the letters, to take the lead in answering objections, and, just to kind of keep the whole thing moving forward.
Okay, very good, very good. Chapter 33 deals with, this is the toughest one, I think, of the whole event, treatment options, choosing the right place to refer the patient, and what choices might be open to the family and what are not. Now, you're a strong believer, as am I, in the value of residential treatment, but it's gotten more and more difficult, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. But there are still good options out there. Partially, this is going to be determined by what resources the family can bring forward. Are they able to pay for treatment privately? Are they dependent on insurance? Is there no insurance? What's the story here? And so that's something that we help them sort out. If they have a lot of resources, then great, that opens up all the possibilities in the world. If they have insurance and they're dependent solely on their insurance, then we may be very helpful to them in not just falling into, what's their local treatment center, which might not be too good. They might be able to use their insurance out of state and get better coverage and a longer length of stay, which would tend to be optimal, as opposed to maybe 10 days of treatment and then into intensive outpatient or IOP, which I don't love. If there's no insurance, then they are often going to be into a state-funded program, which is basically a no-cost option. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, depending on where you live and so forth, you may get a longer length of stay in a state-funded program. But that's changing a lot now, and it can be important to try to figure out, among the state-funded options, among the low-cost or no-cost options, who is going to be really just all about loading the person up on medication. We don't want that, but many places do that. And so that's another place where, if you have the luxury of being able to work with a clinical interventionist, even if it's just to consult a little bit, you may save a lot of heartache by just getting some direction on treatment and organizing your team and so forth.
Yeah, I ran a local treatment center. We really tried to do the very best work we could with limited resources. In our day, I'd have put us up against some of the big fellows out there, because it was all about heart and loving the addict and getting them to see. So the price tag doesn't necessarily relate to, this is a wonderful program,
That's right, because at the end of the day, the treatment center is not going to fix them. Treatment is a launching pad. This is where you can get detoxed, stabilized, learn about the 12 steps, learn about what you are going to have to do going forward to keep your chronic illness in remission and to get well again and get back in control of your life and be available to family and friends again as a normal person in the world. And so sometimes the biggest thing is, how good is the local AA involvement? Are they bringing meetings in? Are they meeting people in the local recovering community, or just representatives of AA and NA and things like that? And are they getting a good feel for this? Like, yeah, this is something I could do, so they can make a commitment to long-term recovery.
I served on the board of the Salvation Army here in Austin, and they have a 6-month program. It's free. The fellows have to work as part of the process. There is not a swimming pool. Get some objections, but I've seen people go through it who've done really, really well. And one of the most beautiful things about residential treatment is you're given time away. No substitute for that.
There's no substitute. The brain is in trouble. The brain is sleep deprived, it's nutritionally deprived, it is been bathed in all these chemicals, and, it needs time to detox and stabilize. We say that a person is detoxed in like 3 days or 5 days. They're not. That's just when their blood pressure comes down and some other physical markers. But that brain is still squirrely. It's still boiling and roiling, and it may take 3 weeks before they can get a decent night's sleep. There is no replacement for time and treatment. I have found, and this is borne out in studies as well, that if people can take 90 days for treatment, that's really the gold standard.
Right.
That's when you really see people settle, get engaged, do the work and treatment that they need to do, and really get committed to their own recovery. And a lot of people will just, scream, my God, 90 days, nobody could take that time. Well, I'll tell you what, there are some other illnesses that may put you in the hospital for that period of time too. And you do what you need to do to get well.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to writing a letter.
Mm-hmm.
You ask each person who's going to be involved in the intervention to write a letter to the alcoholic or the addict. Why a letter?
The letters are the backbone of the intervention, and we want people to write down what they're going to say in advance so that we know exactly what we're going to say. We're going to touch on all the key points that we need to touch on, and we're going to make sure, because we're going to write it, we're going to edit it, we're going to make sure we've got all the I's dotted and T's crossed. We're going to make sure there's not even a hint of anger or judgmental language or anything that's going to take the discussion off track.
When they're reading the letter to you in advance, you're editing it.
When we do a rehearsal before the intervention, we will have met before this. There's a whole process. But when we meet in rehearsal, I like everyone to read their letters aloud. And as we go around the room reading the letters, we make edits. Now, since we've evolved, Debra and I have evolved this 7-point process for writing the letters, I find that they need very little editing.
Yeah, so they know in advance what a good letter is going to contain.
Absolutely. If they follow the 7 points that we lay out in the book, then they're very likely going to come out with a really great letter. And if you have 5 or 7 or 10 of these letters going one after the other, it really gets to the heart of the individual.
Yeah, it's very impactful, very impactful. And they build on one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I bring my defenses up to hold out against this first person, and then the wave comes, and then I go immediately to the second person, and then the wave comes. You strategize in terms of who goes first, who goes second, who goes third.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's run through the 7 points then, okay?
Sure.
I will read them, and I'd like you to comment on each one, maybe give some examples if you could. So number 1 is you start off with connection. You ask the person to state their relationship to the addict. Why that? They already know what the relationship is, don't they?
I know. We want to reinforce that connection and say something very poignant about it. So, for example, a mother may say to her 45-year-old daughter or son or something like that, she may say, dear Sally, I'm here today as your mother. I'm the person who knew you before you were even born. So she's naming the relationship and saying something very poignant and, heartfelt about it. And that in itself sets a tone.
The second part of the letter focuses on love, the name of your book.
Yes.
In your process, this is also the longest part of the letter.
That's right. It's the longest part of the letter, and it's the most important part of the letter. We're not just going to say, oh, I love you, I care about you. In this part of the letter, we're going to talk about why we love you, why we care about you. We're going to talk about times that you, the person we're intervening on, have been there for us personally in our life when we ran into some trouble.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about times that we've been proud of you or great times that we've had together. It's really so unexpected. It's not what, the person thinks they're going to be accused and they're going to be, pointing fingers and all this. No, we're talking about why we really love you and why we cherish you. In some ways, this part of the letter, the love part of the letter, is a little bit like writing a eulogy. if God forbid you were called upon to write a eulogy for this person, what would you say about them? That's the kind of thing that you want in this part of the letter. And if you've ever heard a really good eulogy, you know that it contains a funny part. It contains some great inside the family story that shows what a wonderful person we're talking about. And it's kind of, it's funny, it's charming, it's poignant. And I always say to people, don't hesitate to have some humor in this part of your letter. It's wonderful when, the intervention might start off with a little tension, and then, 4 minutes later, everybody's laughing over a story that everyone knows and loves. And, it's really just marvelous.
Yeah, because this is a heartfelt conversation that, and alcoholic families don't talk about what's going on.
Yeah.
There's unwritten rule. We don't talk about this stuff. But now we're doing it. We're talking about it.
And for example, like let's say we're intervening on John, and John is really mad at his sister Maria because she's been kind of the truth teller and she's been kind of confronting him on this, but she's there, because really they do have a good relationship. And how much is it going to mean to John when Maria says, and when I was going through my divorce 6 years ago, I don't know how I would have ever gotten through that whole year and a half if it wasn't for you. You were the one who called me every day, even though you lived 3 states away, and, and she goes through that and what that means for their connection, their heart connection. It melts everything.
Part 3 centers on understanding that the person has an illness. So this doesn't have to be long. You're not there to give a lecture on addiction, hey? But it is important. Why?
It's important because we're kind of reframing the whole thing as a medical issue as opposed to a willpower issue or, character issue or moral issue or something like that. So it can be very brief. It can be as brief as, I've taken some time to learn about alcoholism and I've come to understand that this is a medical issue. It's not going through that litany again. It's not a moral issue or a character issue or so forth. Because, Joe, if it was just a willpower issue, you would have beaten this years ago. But I now see it as a medical issue that requires professional treatment. So it's a nice little segue between the love part of the letter and number 4, which we're about to get to, the fact, and it's reframing it as something that this person didn't ask for. They didn't raise their hand and say, oh, gee, I want to be an alcoholic when I grow up.
Part 4, then, you want specific facts related to what? Instances where you've been affected?
Yes, but we also want to just establish it beyond a reasonable doubt that there is a problem here. Now, we all know that there's a problem, but so we have the understanding it's a medical issue, and I know you have this problem because, and then I just want the person to state 2, maybe the most 3 facts that they know firsthand that show that the person has lost control of their drug or alcohol use. These should be stated very briefly, like 1 sentence or 2 sentences at the most per fact, and without any trace of anger or judgmental language. Just let the facts speak for themselves. And this is very powerful in that we're not getting into the finger pointing. We're not getting into any, boy, you were such a jerk at grandma's at, Thanksgiving or whatever. Instead, they might just say, and Frank, when you came to grandma's house for Thanksgiving at 2 PM, you laid down on the couch and never got up again, and we couldn't wake you.
Yeah.
They're not even saying anything about the opiate addiction, let's say. But they are saying what everybody knows. He wasn't just tired. He couldn't be woken up for 6 hours. And he knows what you're talking about, and you know what you're talking about, and you can move on. It only took 1 sentence to say it. It's like we're not going to argue about it because everybody only brings forward their firsthand knowledge. It's never hearsay. Mm-hmm. Now, if a person doesn't have firsthand knowledge, let's say it's an aunt who lives 1,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
She may say, Jenny, when I heard everyone talking about what they experienced, my heart was broken for you.
Right.
Because I know how much being a mother means to you and how much your career means to you and everything else. And I know this isn't the real you.
Yeah.
So they can report on their own feelings.
Exactly, exactly. 5, in a good intervention letter, it contains a commitment to be of help to the individual, to stand behind them in this process.
That's right. I want everyone to be quite specific about how they are going to support them going forward. So I want them in this part of the letter to be able to say, and Joey, and in the months ahead, I'm going to begin going to Al-Anon. I'm going to participate in structured family recovery. I'm going to attend the family program at the treatment center. Whatever it is they're going to do, I want them to be actually quite specific about what their commitment is going forward and then do it. Because, if all my family is going to start doing all this recovery stuff, it's going to make it really hard for me as an alcoholic not to do my part. So if everybody's making a real commitment and they're really going to do it, wow, that really creates this forward momentum that I'm going to need to be a part of. And that's why that's again, the whole recovery team idea.
Exactly. 6, this is an interesting one, include an affirmation, painting a picture of what the future in recovery would be like.
Yes, we want to paint a very positive picture of the person coming back, being well, not having to use drugs, not having to drink anymore, and how they are going to really blossom in a way and be better than they ever were before, whether that's as a student, as a parent, as a, whatever. But we want to paint that very positive picture because often when you're locked down in your own addiction, you cannot imagine. I mean, I certainly couldn't imagine my life without alcohol and drugs.
No.
I've been clean and sober for many decades now, 43 plus years at the time of this podcast. And, but I could not imagine my life without alcohol and drugs. I mean, it was an impossibility.
So help them see that. Now, the final point, number 7, an individual invitation to accept treatment. Will you accept the help we're offering you today? Everybody repeats that statement. Is that correct?
Yes, they're going to do some version of it. Now, an influential person might actually talk about the treatment center and say why they think it's a great fit for them. Another person might be just more, saying what you said, just inviting them. Other people will be stressing the idea of, and give it everything you've got, give it 110%, and.
So this is where the chairperson might step in and say, Joe, you've heard from your family, and we've made a reservation for you today to get help. We're here because we love you, and we hope you'll say yes to them.
Okay, so here's the trick. In every intervention, there's a couch. Okay, everybody's always got a couch in their living room or family room. I want the person we're intervening on in the middle, and I want the first letter on one side and the last letter on the other. In an intervention, you always want to start really strong and you want to end really strong. So maybe if we're intervening on Susan, maybe her very best friend or her sister or her brother is going to be letter number 1, and then we're going to go around the room. And then the last letter is going to be Susan's grandfather, whom she loves, and has no baggage with whatsoever. When Grandpa's done with his letter, I want him to put it down. I want him to turn to Susan, maybe even, make physical contact with her, and just say, will you go?
Will you go?
And then no one says a word. No one says a word, because you know what? It's really hard to say no to Grandpa. And often, most of the time, we're not going to get a yes right in that moment, but sometimes we do. And if not, what we're going to hear is something like, well, wait a minute. Now, where is this place? How long am I going for? What? And we're into the objections, which is perfectly fine, perfectly normal, not a problem. But
Right.
I like to do that. It's a little trick, have the last letter, who's extremely influential, just ask, will you go?
You're a couch man, hey?
Yeah, I like the couch. A couch is a we.
It's a we. So there's choreography involved in this thing too, huh?
Yes, and I don't want the letters to go out, in an order around the room so the person knows whose letter is coming next. they don't even know that the first and last letter is sitting next to them, but I want it to kind of ping pong around the room so they don't know who's coming next.
Wow. Very good. Very good. What happens to these letters following the intervention?
Well, they're very powerful. I always want to make sure that they are delivered to the treatment team at the treatment center, along with my clinical synopsis, so that they get a good snapshot. Well, first of all, from me with my synopsis, but then with the letters, the counselor should be able to read through the letters themselves so that they meet the family and friends by proxy through their letters. And so they understand what a great recovery team they have. And then they will give the letters to the individual who's now in treatment so that they can read through them again. And sometimes they'll play a great role in the treatment process. For example, the person might be in group therapy on day 9 and say, well, I just didn't like the way that they did that. I don't think that that was right. And the counselor may say, well, would you please read the letter from your brother to the group? He reads the letter to the group, and the group is like, oh my God, I can't believe your brother said that. That is so beautiful. I wish I had someone say something like that to me. So these letters can have a life of their own in the treatment process that can be very positive.
Now we get to the bottom line, which is very different and distinct from the 7-point letter. This is something different that you work with people to think about, and they have to come up with, it has to be theirs. But talk about the bottom line.
Yes, all these letters are extremely personal, and in most interventions, probably 80% of interventions, we never have to get to the bottom line, but we always want to prepare bottom line letters anyway. And they are different than what most people imagine a bottom line is going to be. Like a lot of people think it's going to be this terrible ultimatum. Or, if you don't go, I'm never going to talk to you. Or if you don't go, this or that. Instead, what we say is, dear Frank, let's say, in the past, I have swept this issue under the rug. I haven't talked to you about it, even though I was worried. I have not been a good friend to you, and I'm really sorry. I thought I was helping you, and I realize now I was only hurting you, and I'm not going to hurt you anymore. All of that is going to stop today. I'm going to start talking about this as the medical issue that it is. And, so anyway, I can go through the points of the bottom line letter, but it starts out in a way that is unexpected because the person is expecting that there's going to be some kind of an ultimatum, that maybe people are going to cut off their relationship. But in fact, we're going to talk to them even more. Now, there can be scenarios where there is an actual consequence. Maybe the spouse, for example, we would not have them say, and if you don't go to treatment, I'm going to divorce you. I'm taking the kids. I'm taking, and all this kind of classical ultimatum. Instead, I would have the wife say, for example, I cannot continue to raise our 3 beautiful children in an alcoholic household. It is taking a toll on them. And so I am going to have to do whatever it takes to protect their welfare. So I hope you'll reconsider and go with Jeff to XYZ today. So if Frank has a brain in his head, he just heard there's going to be a divorce, but it's not being said that way. It's being said in a way, it's calling in an external imperative. I'm taking care of the kids. I have to protect their welfare. I have to do what's right for them. You know it, and I know it, Frank. She's saying it in such a way that it allows Frank to save face. It allows him to say, all right, okay, okay, I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a way that we always want to, I'm going to say it for the 3rd time or 4th time, always try to preserve the person's dignity and give them a way to say yes. It's always our goal.
Yeah. It's a very beautiful process if it's done right. I think it meets the standard of the 4 absolutes. It's honest, it's loving, it's pure, and it's unselfish.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Boy, I'm so glad you brought that in because, the 4 absolutes are such powerful principles. And you're exactly right. And I don't think that anybody has ever made that connection, but you are right on the money. And it is, and the four absolutes make your letters and your presentation a truly spiritual powerhouse. When everyone reads their intervention letter aloud in rehearsal, there are so many tears shed, and they now really believe they are going to be successful. And they believe that they are truly giving the person a gift of love and support and a way out of their dilemma. So they come into the intervention then with a lot of belief and confidence. It's still high anxiety. It's still difficult. I wish I could figure out how to, remove that difficulty from it. But the rehearsal, the letter writing process and the rehearsal process is a game changer for families.
Sometimes you might have the luxury of doing this over the course of several weeks. Sometimes it might be compacted into a weekend where you've got to do your work. Is that correct?
Yes. I did one intervention in 48 hours that was on the other side of the country. But, it was an emergency situation. The person was in a hospital. It was a dire situation, and they were dire in that they knew they were getting out and were at great risk. And so I gave them the letter instructions over a conference call and got on a plane and flew out there, and we did the intervention the next morning, and we did the intervention rehearsal that night when my plane landed, and then did the intervention the next morning and got the person into treatment that day. So it was actually less than 48 hours, but it all worked out.
Yeah, you gotta play the hand you're dealt.
That's right. As long as you're leading with love and heart, and as you so brilliantly said, the four absolutes, I mean, what can go wrong? Even if the person says, no, I'm not going, well, then we just proceed with their bottom lines. And sometimes, let me just add this.
Yeah.
Sometimes a person needs to say no. They may not believe that their bottom lines are real. They may need to test them. Their no may just be a control trip. They're not going today because they've got to show who's boss. They're going to take control of the process. They're going to change the treatment center. They're not going to go until Friday and, whatever.
Right.
Okay. We can work with that. And sometimes they need that. Sometimes they need to test the bottom line to see that everybody really is going to hold together. And they really are going to do the things, beginning Al-Anon, beginning structured family recovery and so forth. And then, sometimes they don't go for several weeks, but that's okay because they may need that time and they may have a better treatment result having said no, having taken control of the process, having tried to fix themselves again by themselves and failing, and then ultimately going. So, there's a lot of ways this thing can play out, and they're all good.
It's a process. Intervention is a process.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very, very nice. Very good. Do you think we might get to the intervention next week?
I think we could.
Well, once again, Jeff, I want to thank you for the excellent information that you shared and the obvious heart that you bring to the process. There's just no substitute for that. And I would encourage folks to get a copy of Jeff's book and visit his website. I've put links to both of those in the show notes, so easy enough to get there. Finally, I want to thank all of you listeners. And if you find the podcasts helpful, please do me a favor and do all those things that they tell you to do on the other podcasts. I don't know what they are, but you ring bells and you jump up and down, and it makes more people aware of what we're trying to get out here.
If you have a question for me, put them in the comments. I will try to answer them.
You can write me at two-way-prayer, TWO, two-way-prayer @gmail.com. And Jeff, how do folks get in touch with you?
Just through the website. There's a contact form there. Or, there's the phone number for our office. And I'm glad to talk to people.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you guys once again for listening. Hope this information was helpful, and God bless. And as we say, keep coming back.